The first thing Van Butler noticed was the silence. She'd forgotten about that, and it took her years a moment to get accustomed to it as she climbed out of the car and looked at the neglected bungalow in front of her. Home. That's what this place had been for the first 20 years of her life, though for the past 8 it had been Mom and Craig's, and somehow that had been easier. It hadn't been Van's job anymore to keep the grass mowed or the stoop swept or any of the other things that Craig had taken on. For the first time in her life, her only responsibility had been to herself, and it had been glorious. She smoothed out the creases on her cream skirt, the humidity already making her feel a little less pristine. Her pale blonde hair was neatly tied back in a low ponytail, her white sleeveless blouse holding its shape in spite of the early summer heat. She took care of her appearance. It was the first thing people saw, after all. From an early age, she'd learned that people judged from appearances.
"Savannah Butler? Is that you?"
Van turned her head to the right. She hadn't noticed her mom's neighbor there. Mrs. DeBoon was kneeling on a bright red gardening pad, a scarf covering her hair and canvas gloves covering her hands as she planted brightly colored flowers into earthy beds. "Hello, Mrs. DeBoon." Van formed an appropriate smile on her face.
"You here to see your mama?"
Van nodded. "That's right."
"Did you hear Craig's gone? Went off with the girl who works in the gas station." She dropped her voice. "Your mom and him were fighting like cats and dogs a couple of weeks ago."
Yeah, Van knew. She also knew that Craig was already living with the woman, some 20 miles from here. Her little sister, Zoe, had told her during a quiet, tear-filled phone call last week. That's why she was here. Because she was needed. Thank God she'd saved up enough from her freelance work to take a break for a while. "Sorry if they disturbed you," Van said, shooting the old lady a quick smile. She walked up the path, her heels catching in the cracks. Craig had only been gone 2 weeks, yet the bungalow already looked like it was missing him. The grass that lined the pathway was up to her calves. Mrs. DeBoon picked up the empty plant pots, slotting them one into the other, before she slowly pushed herself up to standing.
"I should go in before my knees give up."
She gave Van a smile.
"Give my regards to your mother."
She glanced at Van's mom's bungalow and back to Van.
"And I'm glad you're back. For Zoe's sake."
She shuffled up the pathway. Van knew, without a doubt, that she was planning to call her friends to tell them Savannah Butler was back in town. That's what happened in places like Hartson's Creek. People filled the silence with gossip, because it was better than sitting alone. Maybe that's why she'd moved to Richmond as soon as her mom and Craig got married, back when Van was 20 years old. Zoe had been 2 then, pretty as a picture, with her chubby face and golden hair that matched Van's. In so many ways, Craig had been her savior, taking care of her mom and loving Zoe as his own so that Van didn't have to worry about them. For the first time in years, she'd been able to breathe, to not have to anticipate her mom's dizzying mood swings or wonder whether the empty whiskey bottle in the sink was the second or third one of the week. Life had been good, for the most part, since then. Yeah, there had been sad times, particularly whenever she thought of the things she'd lost. But there were good times as well. She was good at her job, working as a freelance event planner in the state capital. And she earned enough to not only live in a pretty apartment, but to live a good life and save money too. She'd always been obsessive about saving. Maybe somewhere deep inside, she'd known her mom was a ticking time bomb. It was a matter of when, not if, she'd detonate. Van rapped her knuckles twice on the door, but nobody answered. Without bothering a third time, Van knelt down on the dusty top step and reached into the planter whose contents were long dead. Crisp brown leaves covered the parched soil as she dug her hand around, a smile curling at her lips as her fingers found the key she was looking for. She slid it into the lock and pushed the creaky door open. "Mom," she called out. "Are you home?"